Good morning, saints of God. Welcome to Wake Up with First Service. I'm your host, Minister Morris. Happy Sunday to all those who are tuning in. Hope the peace, the joy, and the favor of the Lord has found you well over this week and weekend as we're once again coming together to give God his glory and honor for another blessed lesson and another blessed day on this side of Jordan, as we are going to be in the book of Daniel, the third chapter, verses 13 through 18. And our lesson is entitled Refusal to Serve Idols. So in our program today, saints, we're going to examine Daniel 3, verses 13 through 18, where we'll witness the proper response to the pressures of idol worship, as well as the level of faith needed to withstand it. So we're going to see an example today, saints, of those who are refusing to bend or break under the pressure of idol worship, even if that pressure is coming from a king, and even if the results of not bending or breaking to that pressure will mean their immediate death. So who is this Daniel, whose book we are getting inspired and edified from this day? Well, Daniel was a noble Jewish youth that was taken into captivity by King Nebuchadnezzar II, who was the king of Babylon. He was a young man who revealed the mystery of two dreams for King Nebuchadnezzar. We know he did that because those who were in place to do these things could not do it for King Nebuchadnezzar. And we know that he was eventually thrown into a lion's den after disobeying the edict to not pray to any other gods. And finally, he was a man who had three friends who were just as obedient to God as he was. And those three friends were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So this is who Daniel was. He was a man who was called by God to carry out the things that God wanted him to do. So what we're going to see in this lesson is just how important it is, saints, to stick to what we believe in, to stick to what we know, and to stick on the right side of the Lord. Now, let's see what happens leading up to our lesson. So Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Babylon, he set up an image of gold and decreed that when the music was played, that all would fall down and worship this golden image, or be thrown into a fiery furnace. So we see that if we were to look at this statue that Nebuchadnezzar created, it was giant, it was big, it was something that was really, it was overpowering for one to look at. And we know that the furnace was just as ominous. So it was either to bow down to this statue or to be thrown into this furnace and to be killed for refusing to serve this idol, to bow down and to worship this statue. Now, everyone did as they were commanded, except, saints, except Daniel and the three Hebrew boys. And this caused them to be brought before the king. And this is where our lesson picks up. So what we're going to see in this lesson, saints, we're going to see a small snapshot of what happened when the three Hebrew boys refused to bow down and to worship this idol. Instead, they chose to continue to worship, to praise, and to glorify the God that has blessed them, that has kept them, and is currently keeping them in this very tumultuous time where they had to either stand on their faith or die because of it. So let's go down to where our lesson picks up, verses 13 through 15. And what we're going to see in verses 13 through 15, we're going to see the disobedient Hebrew boys are being interviewed by the king. Verses 13 through 15 reads, Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made well. But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? So, because of the accusations of the Chaldeans, which we can see in Daniel 3 and 12, that says, there were certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So this is the accusation by the Chaldean people about the three Hebrew boys. And what they're telling them is exactly what they did. They refused to regard or serve the gods that he has set up. They refused to bow down and openly worship this statue, this idol, this golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And it's because of these actions that the king is now infuriated, because it was an open dismissal of a royal decree by a king to worship an idol. So not only was their actions a slap in the face to this practice of idol worship, but it's also an open dismissal of a God of a kingly decree made by King Nebuchadnezzar. And this is something that is unheard of. Kings, when they put out these decrees, they're carried out immediately. And if they are not carried out immediately, then the consequences are carried out immediately. And in this case, the consequences were, if you refuse to bow down and worship this idol, when you hear the music play, you will be thrown into this fiery furnace to be killed. So what did Nebuchadnezzar do? He chose to summon the men before him and question them for himself. Now, this might seem strange since he already had enough evidence by the Chaldeans brought before him to rightfully throw these three men into the furnace, but he chose to question them himself because Nebuchadnezzar didn't even trust his own, his own wise men, so to speak, his own advisors. And this was because they could not interpret his dreams, claiming only God can do that. So before Nebuchadnezzar dreams were interpreted by Daniel, he asked his own advisors, can you interpret these dreams? What does these dreams mean? And they began to ask him, well, what did you dream? And Nebuchadnezzar was like, well, you're my advisors. I shouldn't have to tell you what I've dreamt. I shouldn't have to tell you the details of what I've dreamt, because you should be able to interpret my dream without me saying anything. And they said only God can do that. So Nebuchadnezzar at that point lost any type of hope, any type of respect for these advisors, any type of trust that he had in them was now gone. Now Christ told his disciples that people would drag them before kings and drag them before governors for his sake, to bear witness before them as well as the Gentiles. And this is just like what the Hebrew boys are doing. And he's talking about this in Matthew 10 and 18. So Matthew 10 and 18 tells us, and ye shall be brought before governors and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them and the Gentiles. So what we're seeing later on in the New Testament, those who are following Christ, those who believe in God, those who are openly showing their faith, they will be dragged before the governors. They will be put before the kings, and they have to bear witness before them and before the Gentiles of the God and of the Savior they're serving. And this is what the Hebrew boys are doing. They're refusing to serve this idol. They're refusing to follow the decree or edict by the king, and they are openly choosing to continue to serve the one true God. And this is what is infuriating King Nebuchadnezzar, because this is something that never happened before. We have nothing in scripture saying that he has thrown anybody in this furnace before for not doing this, because of the threat of being thrown in a furnace was more than enough for many people. But when we're talking about these three Hebrew boys, they have so much faith in God that even a threat of a worldly death, of a worldly suffering, is not enough to shake them out of their faith. So Nebuchadnezzar, in his interrogation of these men, who, by the way, they had positions of great power given to them at the request of Daniel. And it begins with a simple opening question. Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? So it's a very simple question that Nebuchadnezzar is putting before the Hebrew boys. It's either yes or no answer. And he's given them this, I would like to say he's given them this opportunity, this leeway to clear up this if it is a misunderstanding, which is not, but he's given them the opportunity to speak for themselves. And this is because they themselves had great positions, you know, and power given to them because of Daniel speaking up for them, going to bat for them, talking about them in a favorable way to Nebuchadnezzar. So because of that, he gives them this one chance to explain their actions, to explain the accusations that's been brought against them, to refute them, to rebuke them. And this is what he's given them. Now, here's the thing, saints. It's one thing to take a stand for God. It's a whole nother thing to hold firm to that stance when asked, is it true? It's one thing for us to say we praise and we worship and we thank God, or we believe in God. We're walking in his precepts. We're walking in his concepts. We're walking by faith and not by sight. We could say all these wonderful things until that is put to the test. And see, that's the testing. The testing of our faith proves if our faith is real or not. We can say it all day long. We can say it till the chickens come home. But until we are tested on that faith that we are saying that we are so faithful to, that we're saying that we're so fervent about, then how do we know that we really are faithful to the one true God? And this is what the three Hebrew boys are going through. They've openly claimed their faith in God. They've shown their faith in God through their actions. So this is just showing Nebuchadnezzar that they're serious about what they believe in, and they're serious about the God that they're serving. Now, we know Peter came across this test himself, a test of faith. You'll say you'll follow me. You say you believe me behind closed doors. But what happens when you're pressed? What happens when you're out in the open? What happens when claiming to be a child of God, claiming to be a follower of Jesus? What happens when that is not received in the right light? When you know the outcome is not going to be favorable, will you stand firm? Will you stand fervent? Will you continue to hold up that bloodstained banner, or would you set it down and begin to wave the white flag? Now, we know that Peter himself went through this test when he flat out lied and denied knowing Christ, not once, not twice, but 3 times after being questioned about knowing him. And you can see Peter being asked these things in Luke, the 22nd chapter, verses 54 through 62. So, saints, the Hebrew boys, they're in a sticky situation because they know that a truthful answer will bring them a painful death. Therefore, what should they do? What would we do in this situation? Well, there's only 2 answers for this question. Number 1, they can hold fast unto the Lord and to their faith and refuse to compromise their faith and meet a certain death in that fiery furnace. Or number 2, they can give an answer that will please the king of Babylon and not the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. They could turn their back on their faith. They could turn their back on what they believe in. They could turn their back on the God who's kept them, who's blessed them, who's encouraged them, who's given them life. These are the only 2 choices that these Hebrew boys have. And saints, these are the only 2 choices we have today. Either we can serve God or we can serve the world. And that's it. We can either please God or we can please the world. There is no in between. There is no straddling the fence. Either you're on the side of the Lord or we are an enemy of the Lord. But let's continue on and let's find out exactly what these 3 Hebrew boys chose to do. Now, in verse 15, we see that King Nebuchadnezzar is giving these 3 Hebrew boys one more chance to show and prove their loyalty to him, because they've already shown and proved their loyalty to God. So he's given them one last chance to prove their fealty to him, to prove their loyalty to him, to prove that everything that the Chaldeans were saying was wrong, and to show their utmost and dying loyalty and respect for King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, the first thing that he had reemphasized to them was that what was the signal for them to listen out for, which would be some type of musical instruments being played. And he named six of them, and there's a cornet. Now, if we gonna see these instruments, well, number one is a cornet. Number two is a flute. The third one is a harp. Number four is a sackbut. Number five is a psaltery, and number six is a dulcimer. So these are all the instruments that will be played during the time which everyone who's there, everyone who's in present company, would bow down and worship this idol once these instruments were played. And we see many of these instruments look like more they look like more earlier versions of instruments we see today, like guitars, like harps, and trumpets. These are more earlier versions of the musical instruments that we see in today's age. Now, here's the thing: when they hear the music that's played by these instruments, they were to fall down and worship the image that he made. Again, this is the same image that we saw in the beginning of this lesson, this tall statue. When that music was played by these instruments, they were to worship this same idol. Now, this was followed by a warning, and that warning was the warning was the consequences of not abiding by this command, which was to be thrown into a fiery furnace. And this furnace, if we was to look at it, it was a furnace like we might see today, where they melt down molten, metal, a blast furnace. And what it looks like? It looks like a ancient, blast furnace, and it was humongous. It was big enough that you can walk into it, and the door be closed. So this wasn't some little bitty pit of fire. This wasn't something that really wouldn't put fear in nobody's hearts. This was a furnace that once you saw it, it put fear in your heart. And we know that scripture tells about us later in this story about they turned the heat up so high in this furnace that it actually killed those who were around the furnace. They wasn't in it. They was just by the furnace. So we just see the level that Nebuchadnezzar is willing to go to prove his point and to exert his power. Now, Nebuchadnezzar then follows that with a threat, with a question of what God will deliver you out of my hands. So now he's openly dismissing their God, or whoever they are choosing to believe in other than him, who they are choosing to fear and to respect other than him. And this question, it stems from the pride and the arrogance that Nebuchadnezzar had in himself. And that pride and arrogance led him to believe that no one, God or mortal, could stand against him or the decrees he put out. And why would an individual who's a king feel that way? Well, one of the things that would encourage this line of thinking is the fact that nobody has withstood him. Nobody has came against him, whether God or mortal. And if they refused his decrees, if they refused to worship his idol, they were thrown into the furnace and done away with. Nobody has successfully took a stand against Nebuchadnezzar, against his decrees, and against the consequences of going against his decrees. So this is something very new for Nebuchadnezzar. It's very new for somebody to actually take a stand and not fold when questioned, to take a stand and not fold when presented with the fact that you're going to be thrown into this furnace and burned alive. Nobody has done that yet. Therefore, this is what is catching Nebuchadnezzar off guard, but it's also infuriating him even more because in his mind, how dare you openly, dismiss what I say, openly dismiss the things that I put out for the people to do, so much so that other people see it and they're bringing it back to me. It's one thing for a person to do things behind closed doors. These things can be ironed out or they can be taken care of and nobody knows nothing about it. But when a person openly dismisses what one says, what one decrees, especially when we're talking about a king, it makes that king look weak. And now, if you don't put an end to this, now you're going to have to deal with all these different other groups of people who are going to say, you know what? The three Hebrew boys said no, therefore I say no. The three Hebrew boys refused to bend the knee and bow down. Therefore, I'm refusing to bend the knee and I'm refusing to bow down. See, Nebuchadnezzar does not want that. This goes back to when they was in Egypt. It was one of the main reasons why Pharaoh wanted to keep the children of Israel down. Because if we show any type of weakness, if we let them get a foothold, other people are going to see it and they're going to join in. And now we lose what? We lose that control, we lose that influence, and we lose that power. And this is what Nebuchadnezzar was not going to let happen. See, he believed that he was more powerful and had more authority than any other person or God. He believed no gods or deity could undo his declared sentence of death. So he figured what I say goes, and it's etched in stone, and nobody is going to change it, stop it, or deter it. See, this wasn't any old pagan god or deity that Nebuchadnezzar is dealing with. This was the creator of the heavens and the heavens of the earth. This was himself, the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the end. This is not no false god who couldn't hurt or help. This wasn't no false god that could either bless or heal, could do nothing. So this is what Nebuchadnezzar is used to dealing with. These people dealing with false gods who had no power, who had no authority. They couldn't bless, they couldn't hurt, they couldn't direct, they couldn't save. So all this did was build up Nebuchadnezzar's pride and ego. What God are you going to pray to that's going to save you out of this? And Nebuchadnezzar's probably heard a laundry list of gods that people who might have decided not to do this. He heard probably every deity, every god known to man, Asheroth, Molech, all these gods, and none of them have saved anybody until now. And this is just showing you the difference between serving the one true God and serving a false god and worshiping false idols. Now, this brings us to verses 16 through 18, which is the second half of our lesson, the closing half of our lesson. And now that we've seen Nebuchadnezzar's initial response, wanting to question them for himself, not really taking what the Chaldeans are saying to heart because they've already shown that they'll fold under pressure and they can't really do what needs to be done. So he questions them for himself. He wants to hear it out of their own mouth. Whether the charges that's being brought before him are true or not. And if they are true, what God is encouraging you to dismiss what I say, to dismiss my power and dismiss my authority? What God are you saying is going to save you from my hands? So in verses 16 through 18, saints, we're going to see the fervent and steadfast reply of these three Hebrew boys. Verses 16 through 18 reads, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said unto the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So, saints, what we're seeing here, we are seeing some steadfastness. We're seeing some real steadfastness here to stay on the side of the Lord. And what we are also seeing is that they were given the opportunity to respond to what the accusations were, to respond, not necessarily accusations because that's what they did, but to respond to what they did. And in fact, what they were doing, it was not so much as a response. It was a response, but mainly it was a testimony to the goodness of the Lord. That's what this is. In the world, it's a response, it's a reply, it's a rebuttal. But in the case of talking about these saints who are standing fervent on their faith, it's a testimony. And it's not a testimony to the goodness of Nebuchadnezzar. It's not a testimony to the goodness of the world at that time. It's a testimony to the goodness of God who is keeping them and who they know, without a shadow of a doubt, saints, will continue to keep them in spite of all the threats of death that Nebuchadnezzar is bringing before them. And this was a bold move by these three Hebrew boys, especially after he gave them another chance to bow down and avoid being burned alive. So they had an opportunity. Nebuchadnezzar could have just threw them in the furnace the moment the Chaldeans, came with these accusations. But again, the Chaldeans already lost a sense of respect when they themselves couldn't manifest what Nebuchadnezzar wanted them to do, and that's to decipher and interpret his dreams. So we see God's hand was already on this situation way before these accusations came. Why? By taking the credibility away from the Chaldeans. So now when the Chaldeans see these three not doing what was decreed, not doing what was commanded, and they bring it to Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar's going to take what they say with a grain of salt now. Thus they get another opportunity to yay or nay. Yes, we did do it, or no, we didn't do it. So even though they got another opportunity, and most people would have taken that opportunity to recant and say, well, that wasn't me. No, I didn't do that. They must be talking about somebody else. We'll go out there and we'll worship. We'll worship whatever statue, whatever God you want. Most people would do that. But in this case, these three Hebrew boys knew they had to be what? Bold for the Lord. And their boldness is shown through their testimony of what they're going to do, what they're currently doing. And even if God doesn't save them, they're going to stay on the ship and keep praising and worshiping God, regardless of what Nebuchadnezzar says. So this is a bold move, and this is being bold before the Lord in the face of whatever trials, tribulations, or consequences that the world brings before them. And we have to be that same way, saints. We can't sit up here and talk about how we're a good saint, how we're fervent, how we always stand in prayer, always in our prayer closet, always supplicating, always doing this and doing that. But when we are tested, we fold immediately. And we're not like the Hebrew boys getting second and third chances. We're talking about we're folding on the first opportunity to recant, to deny our faith. So we have to understand, we have to stay the course regardless of the consequences. That's how we be bold for the Lord, and that's how we are true saints and true believers of God. Now here's the thing. The Hebrew boys' response was a three-part response. And in these three parts, they really let us know, and they let Nebuchadnezzar know that there is no way, shape or form, there's not a chance that we're going to bow down to this idol, to this statue, to this false god. So in this three-part response, let's look at exactly what they said in each part. So part one was the initial response. And in this initial response, which was that they had no reason. One, they had no reason to respond to Nebuchadnezzar concerning this matter at all. And this is because they believe they did not have to answer him. They didn't have to defend themselves. For what? They believed in the power of God. They believed in the authority of God over everything, even over the power and authority of Nebuchadnezzar. So them saying, look, by us even explaining this to this extent, we don't even have to do this. Because one, we don't really recognize your power or your authority. We don't fear you. We don't fear your power. We don't fear your authority. We fear God. We fear his power and we fear his authority. Therefore, just us talking to you, you should be more than happy with that, because even this little bit, we don't even have to do that. Now, the second part of their response, they believe that the God that they served was able to deliver them out of any trouble or out of any furnace. And this was because they had a good understanding and a good appreciation for the power and authority of God. See, it's hard for us to stand on the side of the Lord when we don't even know the Lord whose side we're standing on. And see, that's where getting in his word really helps us. Having the word taught, having the word preached is good. But once we get into it for ourselves, and the preaching and the teaching supplicates that, it works together with what the understanding that we have. That's when we can really put all our trust in the Lord. That's when we can be bold for the Lord, when we know God for ourselves. It's great to have a preacher and a teacher explain and to express the God that we're serving, the God that we're praying to, the Savior who saved us, and why it was so important, and the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, who is now interceding in our affairs. It's wonderful to be preached that and to be taught that, but it's a whole nother thing when we try to get that understanding for ourselves, so that the preaching and the teaching, it all comes together. And now we have a full and proper and working understanding of the God that we're serving. See, the only way they can understand and appreciate what God is doing is to understand the power and appreciate the authority that he had. And the fact that they believed without a shadow of a doubt that God was able to deliver them out of any trouble, even if it is a furnace, just goes to show you the length of understanding of the God that they're serving. And saints, we got to have that same level of understanding. Because if we have even a small portion of the level of understanding of the power and authority and appreciation of it that God has, then any trial, tribulation, unforeseen circumstance, issue, concern that comes before us, we will be able to stand on our faith boldly for the Lord. And we will wait. We will wait until our deliverance comes. And now this brings us to the third part of their response, their rebuttal, their testimony of the God they're serving. And in this third part, they declared that even if God does not save them, that they would rather die faithful, would rather die obedient to the Lord, rather than serving and bowing down to false idols and to false gods. And that's just a testimony. That is a powerful testimony that even if God don't save me, even if God don't save us, I'd rather die faithful and obedient than to die unfaithful and disobedient, serving gods and bowing down to idols and worshiping them. And that is some faith, saints. And that takes a lot of faith. Even if God doesn't save us out of our current situation, no matter how sticky the situation is, if he does not save us out of our current unforeseen circumstance that's very uncomfortable and very unneeded at the time, we will still serve God. We will still be faithful and obedient to him, whether he saves us or not, whether he delivers us or not, because of what he's already done for us. God didn't just now show up, saints. He wasn't just now here present with us in this current season of being uncomfortable, season of trial and tribulation, whatever it is we're going through. God didn't just now show up. The reason that we're even here to go through whatever trial, whatever tribulation we're going through, whatever sticky season of uncomfortableness that we're going through right now, the fact is that we are only going through this now is because God has kept us this long. We could have passed away a long time ago, saints. And to thine own self be true. Look back over your life. God hasn't just saved you now. He saved us throughout our whole life at certain points and instances in our life. He has stepped in and he has pulled us out of the fire. He has stepped in and he has gotten us out of trouble. He has stepped in and redirected danger that was both seen or unseen. That's why we are here right now, to go through another trial, to go through another tribulation. It's because God kept us. Because we could have died a long time ago, saints. We could have been done away with a long time ago, saints. But it is the power of God that has kept us, so that we can go through another rainy day, so that we can go through another trial, another tribulation, and not stay stuck in it, saints. I say go through it. That means we're going to have a point where we start. There's going to be a middle. But the most important part, saints, there is going to be an end to that season of trial, to that season of tribulation, to that season of trouble, to that season of uncomfortable and unwanted and unneeded circumstances. And basically, saints, they trusted in the Lord regardless of the outcome. If we want to sum all that up, they trusted in the Lord regardless of the outcome. Whether it's good or bad, we still got to trust in the Lord. Whether it's favorable or unfavorable, we still have to trust in the Lord. And this is what the Hebrew boys have done. This is what the Hebrew boys are doing through this testimony. They're telling Nebuchadnezzar, It doesn't matter what you do to us. It doesn't matter how you torture us. It doesn't matter in what manner, what form or fashion you end our lives. Because we are choosing to put our trust in the Lord, regardless of the outcome. And we would rather die faithful and obedient servants of God than die disobedient and unfaithful servants of the Lord. And that has to be our mindset today, saints, more than ever. If you're watching the news, if you're watching TV, if you're reading the newspaper, all the stuff that's going on, we got to be more fervent and faithful to the Lord than ever, saints. And this is a great story to encourage that faithfulness that's in all of us today, to lean more on it, to trust more in it, and to rely on it even more. So, saints, in our program today, we explored Daniel, the 3rd chapter, verses 13 to 18, where we saw the 3 Hebrew boys stand fast and hold fast to their faith, refusing to bow down and worship any other idol or any other god. And they made the conscious choice to choose to die first rather than to die in disobedience to the one true God. And what we saw today, saints, was a test also. It was also a test between a God and a king. A test of who really had the power and who really had the authority when it came to the lives of the 3 Hebrew boys. As well as we also saw a message of hope. For in this short snapshot of these 3 Hebrew boys holding fast to their faith, standing firm on what they believed in regardless of the consequences, trusting in the Lord regardless of the outcome, we saw a message of hope because we witnessed how strong the faith of the believers should be, knowing that God will be with us as we go through some of our most difficult times of trials and tribulations. And for that, God, we say thank you for being with us, for carrying us, for walking with us, for just being an ever-present help in our time of need. The same way you were ever-present help in the time of need for the 3 Hebrew boys. So, saints of God, I hope you have enjoyed our lesson today. Refusal to serve idols, coming from Daniel, the 3rd chapter, verses 13 through 18, where we just saw some real saints standing on some real faith, trusting and believing in a real God. And saints, I hope this has encouraged you today, whatever you're going through as we're coming to the end of 2024, that you choose, that you make the conscious effort to stay faithful to the Lord, believing in his power, believing in his authority, and believing that even if God doesn't get you out this current situation, get you out this problem, this trial or tribulation, that he is still your God, and he is still the God of all creation, that he's still the Alpha and Omega, he's still the beginning and the end. So, saints, I encourage you to tune in next week, same time, same channel, as we go to another great lesson coming from the book of John, the 18th chapter, verses 33 through 37. And that lesson will be entitled Born to be King. And that's going to be a wonderful lesson talking about Jesus, talking about all the wonderful things that was on his shoulders, that he was going to bring because of his presence, because of his manifestation here on earth. It's going to be a wonderful lesson, and it's leading us into the time of Christmas, the time that we celebrate the birth of Christ, and it just goes very well for the time. So, saints, I encourage you to tune in next week for another blessed lesson that's going to come for the Word of God. But until then, stay tuned in, because coming up next is the Hour of Power, where our leader of the gospel, Bishop Banzo, is going to give us a word, a teaching, and a preaching, so that we can continue to stay faithful to God, standing, believing in his power, believing in his authority, and always refusing to serve idols. So, on behalf of Miracle Corner, I have been your host today, Minister Morris, and as always, be safe, be encouraged, be blessed. Until we meet again.